The Krell warband had been hunting for 3 weeks when they found it. Drifting in the dead zone between star systems, the vessel appeared on their scanners like a corpse floating in dark water. Commander Thax Lore studied the readings with his secondary eyes, while his primary pair watched the view screen. The ship was enormous, easily 5 times the size of his destroyer. But it gave off almost no power signature. No heat. No active weapons. Nothing that suggested life aboard. A derelict, his weapons officer grunted, mandibles clicking with satisfaction. Human design. From the look of it, Thax Lore felt his spine ridges rise with interest. Human ships were rare prizes. Ever since the humans had appeared in the galactic community 50 cycles ago, they had been a curiosity, weak in body, short in lifespan, with no natural weapons or armor. Yet they built things that lasted. Their technology, while primitive by Krell standards, had a certain durability that commanded respect in salvage markets. "Scan for life signs," Thax Lore ordered. The scanner operator worked his console, his 4 arms moving across the controls with practiced efficiency. After several moments, he looked up and shook his head. "Nothing, Commander. The ship is dead. No power to the life support. No biological signatures. She's been floating here for months. Maybe longer." Thax Lore leaned back in his command chair, considering. The Krell were warriors first. But even warriors needed to eat. Salvage rights would bring enough credits to supply his warband for half a cycle, and if there were any intact human weapons or navigation systems aboard, the price would triple. The humans had a peculiar talent for weapons design, creating tools of destruction that often exceeded what their fragile bodies should have been able to wield. "Prepare boarding parties," he commanded. 3 teams. I want that ship stripped to the hull plates within 6 hours. And someone determine her name. Even ghosts deserve to be identified before we pick their bones. The communications officer studied his displays. Ship designation appears to be Dawn's Herald, Commander. Registry shows her as a human colony transport. Last known course was toward the Outer Rim territories. A colony ship. That made sense. The holds would be full of equipment, supplies, maybe even weapons meant for frontier defense. Thax Lore felt satisfaction warm his chest. This was turning out to be a profitable hunt indeed. The boarding parties launched in 3 assault shuttles, magnetic clamps ready to attach to the silent hull. Thax Lore watched from his command deck as they approached the massive vessel. She was ugly by Krell standards. All function and no form. Humans built their ships like they built everything else, with a stubborn practicality that ignored aesthetic concerns. The hull was scarred and pitted from micrometeorite impacts, suggesting she had been drifting for quite some time. Team 1, led by his second-in-command Vreknor, attached to the main cargo bay. Team 2 found an airlock near the engineering section. Team 3 clamped onto what appeared to be the bridge tower. All 3 teams reported successful boarding within minutes. Atmosphere is present but stale. Vreknor's voice crackled over the communication system. "Lights are out. Emergency systems appear to have failed. This ship has been dead for a long time. Commander, proceed with salvage operations," Thax Lore ordered. "Start with the cargo holds, then move to weapons and navigation. Strip anything of value." The teams moved into the darkness of the human ship, their helmet lights cutting through the gloom. Thax Lore monitored their progress through the video. Feeds each warrior carried. The interior of the Dawn's Herald was as utilitarian as her exterior. Narrow corridors, low ceilings that would force a Krell to stoop, and walls covered in the strange symbols of human language. Team 1 entered the main cargo hold and immediately radioed back with excitement. "Commander, the hold is full. Terraforming equipment, construction vehicles, enough supplies for a colony of thousands. This is going to take days to properly inventory." Thax Lore allowed himself a satisfied rumble. "Mark everything for extraction. We'll bring the salvage haulers once we know what we have." Team 2 was making their way through engineering, searching for the ship's power cores and drive systems. The feeds showed massive machinery, all cold and silent. Human engineering was always impressive in its complexity. Where Krell would use one large component, humans would use dozens of smaller ones, each backing up the others. It made their ships difficult to kill but apparently easy to abandon. Team 3 had reached the bridge. The command center was smaller than a Krell bridge, designed for the humans' compact bodies. Consoles lined the walls, all dark and lifeless. The captain's chair sat empty in the center, a silent throne for a ghost. Vreknor moved through the space, his helmet camera capturing everything. "Looking for the ship's logs," he reported. "If we can recover the navigation data, we can." He stopped mid-sentence. On the feed, Thoxlor saw him freeze, his posture suddenly tense. "Vreknor, report." "Commander, there's something here." On the captain's console. "It's still active." That was impossible. The ship had no power. "Clarify." "There's a display. It's showing a countdown." "Commander, it's at 30 seconds. Thaxlor felt his battle instincts surge. "All teams, evacuate immediately." "That's an order." But even as he spoke, he knew they wouldn't make it. 30 seconds wasn't enough time to reach the airlocks, cycle through, and get clear. His warriors were trapped inside the hull of a dead ship that suddenly wasn't quite as dead as it appeared. "Vreknor, what else is on that display?" "Text, Commander. Human language. I'm translating now." There was a pause. "It says, 'Welcome, pirates.'" "You chose poorly." The feeds went dark. Every single camera, every communication channel, every sensor linked to the boarding parties vanished in the same instant. Thaxlor lunged forward in his chair, roaring orders at his crew. "Get those channels back." "Now." "Trying, Commander, but something is blocking our signals. It's like the ship's hull just became a dead zone for all transmissions." On the view screen, the Dawn's Herald remained as dark and lifeless as before. Nothing had changed in her appearance. No lights had activated. No weapons had deployed. She simply floated in space, holding 15 of his best warriors in her dead metal belly. "Bring us alongside," Thaxlor commanded. "Prepare cutting equipment. We're going to carve our way in, if we have to." But before the helm could respond, something changed. The human ship's running lights flickered on. Not all of them. Just enough to outline her massive form in the darkness. And then, slowly, deliberately, her main engines ignited. The drive flares glowed a brilliant blue, pushing the ship forward with a gentle acceleration. "She's moving, Commander. I can see that." Thaxlor watched in disbelief as the supposedly dead vessel began to maneuver. She wasn't moving like a derelict caught in gravity or momentum. She was moving with purpose, her thrusters firing in calculated bursts. Someone, or something, was piloting her. "Hail them. All frequencies." The communications officer worked frantically at his station. After several moments, a connection established. The main view screen flickered and changed, showing not a human face, but lines of text in multiple languages. The translation matrix worked quickly, rendering the message into Krell script. "This vessel operates under Protocol Omega. All trespassers will be detained for trial. Resistance will be met with appropriate force. You have one opportunity to withdraw your remaining forces and depart. This courtesy will not be extended twice." Thaxlor read the message twice, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. Protocol Omega? What kind of automated system was this? And more importantly, what did it mean by detained for trial? "Commander, we have to get our warriors back." "I'm aware of that." Thaxlor forced himself to think clearly. Anger and confusion were the enemies of good strategy. "Can we target their bridge? Disable their control systems?" The weapons officer studied his displays. "Negative, Commander. We'd need to punch through too much hull plating. By the time we breached their bridge, we'd likely kill everyone inside, including our own warriors." The text on the view screen changed. "Your response time has elapsed. Failure to withdraw will be interpreted as hostile intent. Final warning." Thaxlor made his decision. "Power weapons. Target their engine nacelles. We cripple her drives. Then we board in force and take back our people." "Commander, if there are humans alive aboard that ship?" "There can't be. We scanned her thoroughly. She's dead. This is some automated defense system, nothing more. And we're going to shut it down." He brought his primary fist down on the arm of his command chair. Fire! The Krell destroyer's plasma cannons spoke with thunder. Bolts of superheated energy crossed the void between ships, targeting the Dawn's Herald's engine section. The shots were precise, aimed to disable rather than destroy. Thaxlor wanted that ship intact if possible. The plasma struck the human vessel's aft shields. Shields that shouldn't have existed on a dead ship. Shields that absorbed the plasma with barely a flicker. Impossible, the weapons officer breathed. Her shields are at full strength. That should require her main reactor operating at maximum capacity. But we detected no power signature. The text on the view screen disappeared, replaced by a single word that made Thaxlor's blood run cold. Hostile. The Dawn's Herald moved. Not with the gentle acceleration of before, but with a sudden, violent burst of speed that no colony transport should possess. She spun on her axis, bringing her broadside to face the Krell destroyer, and her true nature revealed itself. Weapons ports opened along her hull, dozens of them, hundreds. Every one of them had been hidden behind false hull plates, disguised to look like simple cargo storage or maintenance hatches. The colony transport designation had been a lie. This ship was a warship, a predator pretending to be prey. Evasive maneuvers. Thaxlor roared, but his helmsman was already moving. The destroyer's engines screamed as the ship tried to turn, tried to bring her own weapons to bear, or at least present a smaller target. The Dawn's Herald fired. Not with plasma or missiles or any of the weapons the Krell recognized as military grade. She fired with beams of coherent light, lasers so powerful they could cut through armor plating like it was paper. The beams lanced out, targeting the destroyer's weapon systems with surgical precision. Plasma cannons exploded in their housings. Missile tubes were slagged shut. In less than 5 seconds, the Krell warship had been completely disarmed. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence. They had gone from hunters to prey in the span of a single exchange. Thaxlor's tactical mind raced through options, and found them all wanting. They couldn't fight. They couldn't flee. Not with those engines capable of running them down. They couldn't even threaten to destroy the human ship. Not with their own warriors trapped inside. They were helpless. The text returned to the view screen. This vessel is the TCNS Dawn's Herald, operating under the authority of the Terran Confederacy Navy. You have committed acts of piracy against a military vessel. Your crew will be detained pending trial. Any further hostile action will result in the complete destruction of your ship. You will prepare to be boarded. Thaxlor felt his combat instincts warring with his survival instincts. Every part of his warrior training screamed at him to fight, to resist, to die with honor rather than submit. But he had a crew depending on him, warriors trapped inside that deceptive human ship. And perhaps most importantly, he had just made the worst tactical error of his career. He had attacked a superior force based on arrogance and assumptions. He had mistaken the ghost ship for easy prey. And now he was learning the price of that mistake. Stand down, he ordered quietly. All stations, cease hostile actions. Prepare to receive boarders. His crew looked at him with expressions mixing shock and shame, but they obeyed. Krell warriors knew how to follow orders, even orders that burned with dishonor. The Dawn's Herald moved closer, her bulk dwarfing the destroyer. Up close, Thaxlor could see details he'd missed before. The hull wasn't just scarred from micrometeorites. There were blast marks, carbon scoring from plasma weapons, patches where armor had been replaced or reinforced. This ship had seen combat. Real combat. The kind that left permanent scars. A new docking tube extended from the human vessel. Magnetic clamps locking onto the destroyer's hull, with solid thuds that resonated through the ship's frame. Thaxlor stood from his command chair, drawing himself up to his full height. If he was going to face whatever came through that airlock, he would do it standing. The airlock cycled, the inner door opened, and what came through was not what anyone expected. They were machines, humanoid in shape but clearly artificial, their bodies composed of metal and synthetic materials. Each stood roughly the height of a Krell warrior, their frames sleek and purposeful. They moved with fluid precision, weapons held ready but not actively aimed. Their optical sensors glowed with a soft blue light, tracking every movement on the bridge. Behind the machines came a single human, male, by the apparent gender markers of the species, dressed in what Thaxlor recognized as a naval uniform. He was old for a human, with gray in his hair and lines on his face that spoke of long years and hard experience. He walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg, but his posture was straight and his gaze was steady. He looked around the bridge, his eyes taking in every detail, before settling on Thaxlor. When he spoke, his voice was calm and measured, the tone of someone who had seen everything and was no longer impressed by displays of aggression. "I am Captain James Morrison of the Terran Confederacy Navy. This vessel and her crew are now under military detention. You will surrender your weapons and submit to processing. Cooperation will be noted favorably in your trial. Resistance will be met with force. Do you understand these terms?" Thaxlor stared at the human. The creature was tiny compared to a Krell, fragile and soft, with none of the natural weapons that evolution had granted stronger species. But there was something in his eyes, a hardness that spoke of battles fought and won, that made Thaxlor's warrior instincts recognize a fellow predator. "I understand," Thaxlor said, his voice carrying across the silent bridge. "But answer me one question, human. Why the deception? Why pretend to be a dead ship?" Captain Morrison's expression didn't change. "Because pirates are predictable. You see something helpless, you attack. You board before you think. And once you're inside, once you've committed to the trap, it's already too late." He gestured to one of his machines. "Secure their weapons. Be thorough but respectful. These warriors made a mistake, but they're not criminals yet." As the machines moved through the bridge, collecting weapons and securing the crew, Thaxlor felt the full weight of his failure settling on his shoulders. They had seen a ghost ship and assumed it was easy prey. They had ignored the possibility that the humans, those weak and fragile creatures, might be more dangerous than they appeared. They had learned the oldest lesson of warfare the hard way. Appearances can be lethal when used by someone who understands deception. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Thaxlor wondered what other surprises the humans had prepared for a galaxy that consistently underestimated them. If this was what they did to pirates, what were they capable of in actual war? He had a feeling he was about to find out. The holding cells aboard the Dawn's Herald were not what Thaxlor expected. He had imagined cramped cages, harsh conditions designed to break the spirit of prisoners. Instead, he found himself in a room large enough for a Krell to stand comfortably, with a sleeping platform adjusted to his species' physiology, facilities that accommodated his biology, and even a viewport that showed the stars outside. It was civilized, almost disturbingly so. The door was transparent, allowing him to see into the corridor beyond. His warriors occupied similar cells along the hallway, all of them looking as confused and troubled as he felt. Being captured was shameful. Being captured and then treated with respect was somehow worse. It made him feel like a child being scolded rather than an enemy being punished. Captain Morrison appeared in the corridor several hours after the detention began. He walked slowly, his limp more pronounced now, as if the earlier display of strength had taken its toll. He stopped in front of Thaxlor's cell and studied the Krell commander through the transparent door. "You're the leader," Morrison said. It wasn't a question. "The one who gave the order to board. I am Commander Thaxlor of the Krell 3rd Warband. And yes, I gave the order. My warriors were following my commands. Whatever punishment you intend, it should fall on me alone." Morrison's expression shifted into something that might have been respect. "Loyalty to your crew. That's admirable. But you're not in a position to negotiate terms. Not yet." He touched a control panel, and the cell door became opaque on the outside, preventing anyone else from seeing or hearing their conversation. "I'm going to tell you something, Commander. Something that might help you understand what happened today." Thaxlor remained silent, his posture alert. The Dawn's Herald isn't a colony transport. She was, once, 30 years ago. She carried 5,000 colonists to the Outer Rim, helped establish 3 settlements, and served with distinction for 15 years. Then, the war started. What war? The humans have been at peace with all known species since joining the galactic community. The war you've never heard about, Morrison said quietly. The one we fought in the dark between the stars. You see, Commander, humans learned early that we're not the strongest species, not the fastest, not the most advanced. But we learned something else too. We learned that there are worse things than military defeat. There's slavery, exploitation, extinction. Thaxlor felt his spine ridges rise with interest. This was information the Krell intelligence networks had never uncovered. Who did you fight? Species you've never encountered. Species that exist in the void between the major trade routes, preying on whoever wanders into their territory. They saw humanity as we were 30 years ago, weak and vulnerable, perfect targets for their expansion. They destroyed 4 human colonies before we even knew they were there, killed everyone. Men, women, children. Didn't even bother to take slaves, just erase those settlements like they'd never existed. The human captain's voice remained level, but Thaxlor could hear the anger beneath it, cold and controlled. We couldn't fight them in open battle. They had better ships, better weapons, better everything. So we adapted. We turned our weakness into strength. We built ships that looked helpless. Colony transports, cargo haulers, mining vessels, and we filled them with weapons and crew trained specifically for close quarters combat. Ghost ships, Thaxlor said, understanding dawning. You used yourselves as bait. We did. And it worked. Those predators saw easy prey and attacked without thinking. Just like you did. By the time they realized their mistake, they were already inside our trap. We fought them in the corridors of our own ships, in the places we designed specifically for defense. We bled them until they learned that humans weren't worth the cost. Morrison moved closer to the cell door, his eyes hard. The war lasted 8 years. The Dawn's Herald participated in 17 major engagements. She was boarded 43 times. Every single boarding party was defeated or detained. This ship has more combat experience than most military vessels in the galaxy, and she's still out here, still doing her job, because pirates like you still look at a helpless human ship and see easy credits. Thaxlor processed this information, his tactical mind working through the implications. But we scanned your ship. There was no power signature, no life signs. How did you hide all of that? Technology, Morrison said with a slight smile. Humans might not be the strongest or the fastest, but we're very good at solving problems. We developed stealth systems that can mask power signatures, heat emissions, even life signs. We can make a fully powered battleship look like a dead Hulk. It's expensive and requires constant maintenance, but it works. As you've discovered, and the automated systems, the countdown, there's an AI core aboard every ghost ship. Not a true artificial intelligence, but close enough. It monitors the ship, assesses threats, and executes defensive protocols when needed. The countdown was real. Once it hit 0, the ship activated her full combat systems and began treating your boarding parties as hostile intruders. Thaxlor felt a chill run through him. You said, detained for trial. What happened to my warriors who boarded your ship? They're in cells like this one, being processed. None of them were harmed unless they resisted. The machines I brought to your bridge are combat drones, but they're programmed to use minimum necessary force. Your warriors will face trial under Terran Confederacy law for piracy and attempted theft of military property. What is the punishment for such crimes? Morrison was quiet for a moment. That depends on several factors. Intent, prior offenses, willingness to cooperate, and most importantly, whether anyone was harmed in the commission of the crime. Your warriors boarded an empty cargo hold and an abandoned engineering section. They broke some equipment but didn't destroy anything critical, and when my drones confronted them, they surrendered without fighting. He paused. That counts for something, so they might not be executed? Execution? Morrison looked genuinely surprised. Commander, we're not barbarians. The standard sentence for piracy without violence is 5 to 10 years of labor service. usually in maintenance or construction roles on frontier stations. It's not pleasant, but it's not death. Your warriors will survive to see their families again. Thaxlor felt relief wash through him, followed immediately by confusion. Why are you telling me this? Why show mercy to enemies who attacked you? Because you're not my enemy. You're a pirate who made a bad decision. There's a difference. Morrison leaned against the wall, taking weight off his bad leg. I've been doing this job for 25 years, Commander. I've fought real enemies, species that want to genocide humanity or enslave our colonies. Compared to them, you're just an opportunist who got greedy and walked into a trap. You don't deserve death. You deserve a chance to learn from your mistake. The Krell commander studied the human captain, seeing him clearly for the first time. The limp wasn't from age or carelessness. It was a war wound, something earned in battle. The lines on his face weren't just from years, but from hard decisions and harder consequences. This was a warrior. The human equivalent of what Thaxlor aspired to be. I underestimated your species, Thaxlor admitted. I saw weakness where there was strategy. I saw vulnerability where there was preparation. It was a failure of intelligence and judgment. It's a common mistake, Morrison said. Humans look weak because we are weak, physically. We didn't evolve claws or armor plating or redundant organs. We evolved brains and hands and the ability to work together, and when you're the weakest species in a dangerous galaxy, you learn to be creative, or you go extinct. He straightened up, preparing to leave. Your trial will be held in 3 days. You'll be assigned a legal representative who speaks your language and understands Krell law. The trial will be fair, and your rights will be protected. Is there anything you need in the meantime? Thaxlor thought about that. Information. I would like to understand more about human military doctrine. If I am to spend years in your custody, I would prefer to understand the species that captured me. Morrison smiled, and it was a genuine expression. I'll have some reading material sent to your cell. Historical accounts, tactical analyses, that sort of thing. Nothing classified, but enough to satisfy your curiosity. He turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Commander. That question you asked earlier. About why the deception. There's a second answer I didn't give you. What is it? Because in war, the enemy gets a vote. They get to choose how they approach you, how they engage you, whether to fight or flee. But if you can control what they see, if you can make them think you're something you're not, then you control their choices. You make them vote the way you want. His expression hardened. We learned that lesson the hard way, in the dark, while our colonies burned. And we'll never forget it. He left, his footsteps echoing in the corridor, leaving Thaxlor alone with his thoughts. The Krell commander sat on his sleeping platform and stared out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Krell High Command would be wondering what happened to his warband. They would assume he had been destroyed in battle or lost to some navigational hazard. They wouldn't know that he had been captured by a species they considered barely worth noticing. And that, Thaxlor realized, was the most dangerous thing about humans. They had been underestimated for so long that they'd built their entire military philosophy around it. They didn't try to be stronger or faster or more advanced. They just made sure that when someone looked at them, they saw exactly what the humans wanted them to see. Ghost ships. What a perfect metaphor. Ghosts weren't dangerous because they were strong. They were dangerous because you didn't know they were there until it was too late. Over the following days, Thaxlor read the materials Morrison had provided. Historical accounts of human conflicts, both with each other and with alien species. Tactical analyses of battles fought in the void. Strategic documents discussing human approaches to warfare and diplomacy. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and troubling. Humans were adaptable in ways that most species simply weren't. When faced with a superior enemy, they didn't simply accept defeat or die honorably. They changed. They evolved. They found new ways to fight, new strategies to employ, new technologies to develop, and they did it fast, faster than should have been possible for a species with such short lifespans. One account particularly caught his attention. It described a human colony that had been besieged by a species called the Vorthax. Heavily armored warriors who specialized in ground combat. The humans had been outnumbered 5-1, outgunned, and facing an enemy that could shrug off most conventional weapons. By every logical calculation, the colony should have fallen within days. Instead, the humans had flooded the battlefield with a fast-growing foam that hardened into a rock-like substance. The Vorthax warriors, with their heavy armor, had sunk into the foam and been trapped. Unable to move, they had become easy targets for the colony's defenders. The siege had ended in less than a day, with the Vorthax retreating in confusion and rage. The analysis that followed the account was even more interesting. It noted that the foam had originally been developed for construction purposes, meant to create quick temporary structures. The humans had repurposed it as a weapon in a matter of hours, adapting a peaceful technology to military use without hesitation. That was the pattern Thaxlor saw repeated throughout the materials. Humans didn't have the natural advantages of other species, so they made their own advantages. They turned their environment into weapons. They used deception as a force multiplier. They cooperated in ways that other species found difficult, coordinating actions across vast distances and different specializations. They were dangerous not despite their weakness, but because of it. They had been forced to become creative, to think in ways that stronger species never needed to consider. And now that creativity was applied to everything they did, from ship design to combat tactics to diplomatic negotiations. The trial, when it came, was nothing like what Thaxlor expected. He had assumed it would be a formal affair, with grand pronouncements and theatrical displays of justice. Instead, it was conducted in a small courtroom aboard the Dawn's Herald, with a human judge, a legal representative for Thaxlor, and a prosecuting attorney presenting evidence. The charges were read clearly: attempted piracy, trespass on military property, attempted theft of government assets. Each charge was explained in detail, with evidence presented from the ship's sensor logs and security recordings. Thaxlor watched himself order the boarding, watched his warriors enter the ship, watched the trap close around them. It was humbling to see his failure laid out so clinically, reduced to data and timestamps. His legal representative, a human woman named Sarah Chen, argued that Thaxlor had believed the ship to be a legitimate salvage opportunity. She presented evidence that the Dawn's Herald had been broadcasting a false distress signal, specifically designed to attract pirates. She argued that the trap itself constituted a form of entrapment under certain interpretations of galactic law. The prosecutor countered that broadcasting a false signal was not illegal, and that Thaxlor had made no attempt to verify the ship's status before boarding. He had acted on assumption and greed, not on legitimate salvage protocols. The fact that it was a trap didn't absolve him of responsibility for falling into it. The judge listened to both sides, asked questions, and reviewed the evidence. Then, he rendered his verdict. Commander Thaxlor, you are found guilty of attempted piracy and trespass on military property. The charge of attempted theft is dismissed due to insufficient evidence of intent to permanently deprive the owner of property. You are sentenced to 5 years of labor service, with the possibility of parole after 3 years for good behavior. You will be assigned to maintenance duties on Frontier Station 7, where your technical skills will be utilized in support of civilian infrastructure. 5 years. Thaxlor absorbed the sentence without emotion. It was fair. By the standards presented, he had broken the law, been caught, and now would pay the price. His warriors received similar sentences, none longer than 6 years. As the proceedings concluded, Captain Morrison approached him. You'll be transferred to the station in 2 days. It's hard work, but the humans and aliens there will treat you fairly. Keep your head down, do your job, and you'll be home before you know it. Captain, Thaxlor said carefully. May I ask you something? Of course. Why did you tell me about the war? About the ghost ships and the strategy behind them. That information could be valuable to potential enemies. Morrison smiled slightly. Because, Commander, the best way to stop people from attacking ghost ships is to tell them the ships aren't really ghosts. Once you know the trick, it stops working. And I'd rather have fewer fights than more victories. He started to walk away, then paused. Besides, you strike me as someone who learns from mistakes. Maybe you'll spread the word among your people. Save someone else from making the same error you did. Redid. Thaxlor watched the human leave, understanding, settling over him like a heavy cloak. The trap wasn't just the ship. The trap was the story. By capturing pirates, and then treating them fairly. By explaining the deception and making it public. The humans were spreading a message across the galaxy. We are not easy prey. We are not helpless. Attack us at your own risk. It was psychological warfare on a grand scale. And like everything else the humans did, it was both simple and devastatingly effective. 2 days later, Thaxlor and his warriors were transferred to Frontier Station 7. As the transport ship pulled away from the Dawn's Herald, he looked back at the massive vessel. She looked like a colony transport again. All her weapons hidden. Her true nature concealed. Already, she was broadcasting another distress signal. Already preparing for the next pirate foolish enough to mistake her for easy prey. Somewhere in the galaxy, another hunter would see that signal. They would scan the ship and find no power signature. They would see an opportunity for profit and glory. And they would board, confident in their superiority, and the ghost ship would teach them the same lesson she had taught Thaxlor. In the darkness between the stars, nothing is what it seems, and the weakest-looking prey might just be the most dangerous predator of all. Frontier Station 7 orbited a dying red dwarf star in a region of space that most civilized species avoided. It was too far from major trade routes to be profitable. Too close to uncharted territories to be safe, and too populated with desperate colonists and frontier workers to be ignored. The station itself was a massive construction of metal and composite materials, built in sections over decades, as the frontier expanded slowly outward into the dark. Thaxlor's first impression was of organized chaos. Ships came and went constantly, carrying supplies, workers, families, seeking new lives. The docking bays were crowded with vessels from a dozen species, all in various states of repair. The corridors were wide enough to accommodate even large species like the Krell, but they were cramped with beings of all shapes and sizes, all moving with the purposeful hurry of people who had too much work and not enough time. His processing was handled by a tired-looking human administrator who barely glanced at his records before assigning him to the engineering section. "You have technical training," the human said, reading from a data pad. "Good. We need people who understand ship systems and power distribution. Report to Chief Engineer Martinez in Section 7. She'll explain your duties." Chief Engineer Maria Martinez was a human woman in her 50s, with gray-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun and hands that showed decades of manual labor. She looked up as Thaxlor entered her office, studied him for a moment, then nodded. "You're the Krell from the Dawn's Herald incident." "Heard about that. Welcome to the station, Commander." "I am no longer a commander," Thaxlor said quietly. "I am a convict laborer." "You're whatever you make yourself here," Martinez replied, standing and coming around her desk. Despite her small size compared to a Krell, she moved with confidence. "I don't care what you did to end up here. I care whether you can do the work. Can you? I was trained in ship systems and combat engineering. I can adapt to station maintenance." "Good, because we've got 17 critical systems that need attention, 5 minor disasters waiting to happen, and enough small repairs to keep a crew of 50 busy for a year. And I've got a crew of 20, including you now." She handed him a datapad. "This is your assignment list. Priority items are marked in red. You'll work 10-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Your quarters are in Section 12, Level 3. Any questions?" Thaxlor scanned the list. It was extensive and varied, covering everything from power relay maintenance to life support system repairs. "No questions. When do I start?" 20 minutes ago. "Ideally. But I'll give you an hour to get settled. Report back here when you're ready." She turned back to her desk, already focused on the next problem. "And, Commander?" Welcome to the frontier. It's not glamorous, but it's honest work. You'll do fine. The quarters were small but functional, similar to the cell on the Dawn's Herald, but with more personal space. Thax Lore had a bed, a small desk, and a storage locker. There was a window that looked out at the stars, showing the vast emptiness beyond the station's protective hull. He stared at that window for a long moment, thinking about how far he'd fallen and how much further he might still go. Then he picked up the datapad and started reviewing his assignments. Sitting idle wouldn't change his situation. Work would at least give him purpose. The labor was hard but not unreasonable. Martinez assigned him to work with a mixed crew that included 2 humans, a Tellurian with crystalline skin, and a Dravik whose 6 limbs made her ideal for working in tight spaces. They were professional, treating Thax Lore neither as a convict nor as a former commander, but simply as another worker. It was refreshing after the shame of the trial and imprisonment. His first major assignment was repairing a power distribution node in the station's lower levels. The node had been damaged by a power surge and needed complete rewiring. It was tedious, technical work that required precision and patience. Thax Lore found himself falling into the rhythm of it, his hands moving through familiar patterns. His mind focused on solving the immediate problem rather than dwelling on larger failures. As he worked, one of the human crew members, a young man named David, made conversation. "So you're from the Dawn's Herald incident. That must have been something, getting caught by a ghost ship." Thax Lore paused in his work, considering whether to respond. Finally, he decided there was no point in hiding. It was educational. "I learned the danger of assumptions. Yeah, the humans are tricky like that. My dad served on a ghost ship during the Void Wars. Said it was the strangest combat duty he ever pulled. Weeks of floating in dead space, pretending to be helpless, then suddenly everything activates and you're in a fight for your life." David handed Thax Lore a tool. He said it took a special kind of person to serve on those ships. You had to be patient enough to wait, and crazy enough to fight. The captain mentioned the Void Wars. "I have read accounts, but they seem incomplete. Much of the conflict is not recorded in galactic databases." David laughed. "That's because humans like to keep their tricks secret. The ghost ships worked so well that we kept using them long after the wars ended. Now, they're mostly used for anti-piracy operations, like catching your warband, but there are still a few out in the deep dark, watching for threats that most species don't even know exist." "What kind of threats?" The young human's expression turned serious. "The kind that live in the spaces between stars. The kind that think anyone passing through their territory is fair game. Humans ran into them when we first started pushing into deep space, and we learned the hard way that the galaxy isn't as civilized as the core worlds like to pretend. Out here on the frontier, there are things that make pirates look friendly." Thax Lore felt his spine ridges rise with interest. "Your species has encountered hostile aliens that the galactic community doesn't know about? Encountered, fought, and usually negotiated truces with. Humans are good at making deals with things that want to kill us. We're also good at teaching them that killing us is more expensive than leaving us alone." David connected a power relay and checked the readings. "That's stable. Next node?" They worked in silence for a while, Thax Lore processing this new information. The humans were more active in the frontier than he'd realized, more engaged with dangers that the core species ignored. It explained a lot about their military philosophy and their ship designs. They weren't preparing for wars with known enemies. They were preparing for threats that might emerge from the dark at any moment. Over the following weeks, Thax Lore settled into a routine. Work during the day. Study in the evening. Sleep when exhaustion forced it. The station's library had an extensive collection of human military history and tactical theory, and he devoured it all, building a more complete picture of this species that had captured him so easily. He learned about human conflicts throughout their history, the endless cycle of war and innovation that had shaped their civilization. He learned about their philosophy of combined arms, where different specializations supported each other to create a force greater than the sum of its parts. He learned about their emphasis on logistics and supply lines, the understanding that battles were won as much by preparation as by combat. But most importantly, he learned about human adaptability. Every conflict in their history showed the same pattern. Faced with a superior enemy, humans changed their tactics, developed new weapons, found new strategies. They didn't have the physical advantages of other species, so they made their environment and their technology into advantages. They turned their weaknesses into strengths through creativity and determination. 3 months into his sentence, Thax Lore was supervising a repair crew when the alarm sounded. It was a deep, resonant tone that cut through all other noise, a sound that made everyone stop and look up in fear. Station-wide emergency. All hands to alert stations. Martinez's voice came over the communication system. This is Chief Engineer Martinez. We have an incoming vessel on a collision course with the station. Impact in 15 minutes. All repair crews report to emergency stations. Prepare for potential hull breaches. Thax Lore didn't hesitate. His military training took over, pushing aside any thought of his convict status. David, secure the power systems. Make sure we won't lose gravity or life support. If we take damage, Tellurian crystal worker, whose name he'd learned was Kresh, get to the emergency bulkheads and prepare to seal sections on my command. Dravik, you're with me. We're going to the observation station to assess the threat. His crew moved immediately, responding to the command in his voice. It was only after they'd scattered to their tasks that Thax Lore realized he'd given orders, had taken command without thinking. He was supposed to be a laborer, not a commander. But there was no time to worry about protocol. There was work to do. He reached the observation station just as the incoming vessel became visible to the naked eye. It was a cargo hauler, its engines dead, tumbling through space on pure momentum. Debris surrounded it, suggesting some kind of catastrophic failure, and its trajectory was taking it directly toward the station's central hub. Martinez arrived moments later, breathing hard from running. Status? Cargo vessel. Approximately 2,000 tons. No active engines or maneuvering thrusters. She's going to hit us in 13 minutes unless we do something. Suggestions? Thax Lore studied the situation, his tactical mind working through options. We could use the station's positioning thrusters to move us out of the way. But that would take 20 minutes minimum. We could fire on the ship, try to break it apart or alter its trajectory, but that risks sending debris into the station anyway. Or we could attempt to intercept it with a tugboat, try to slow it down, or change its course. Tugboats can't get there in time, Martinez said. And we can't move the station fast enough. That leaves shooting at it, and I really don't want to scatter debris across 3 sections of this station. She looked at Thax Lore. You're Krell military. You've dealt with situations like this. What would you do? Thax Lore felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in months. Purpose. Not the simple satisfaction of completed work, but the sharp clarity of a tactical problem that needed solving. On a Krell warship, we would launch a shuttle, match velocity with the cargo vessel, and use magnetic anchors to attach to it. Then we'd use the shuttle's thrusters to slow the larger ship, changing its trajectory enough to miss the station. That's insane. The mass differential alone would tear the shuttle apart. Only if we tried to stop it completely, we only need to change its course by a few degrees. At this distance, that's enough to turn a direct hit into a near miss. Thax Lore turned to face her fully. I can do this. I've performed similar maneuvers in combat situations. But I'll need a shuttle and permission to launch immediately. Martinez stared at him for a long moment. Then she activated her communication device. This is Chief Martinez. I need a shuttle prepped for immediate launch in Bay 7. And I need authorization to assign a convict laborer to a critical safety operation. She listened to the response, her expression never changing. Yes, I'm sure. Get me the authorization. We're out of time. 2 minutes later, Thax Lore was strapping himself into a shuttle, running through pre-flight checks with practiced efficiency. David had insisted on coming with him, arguing that the shuttle needed a co-pilot to manage systems, while Thax Lore focused on flying. Martinez had agreed, and now the young human was in the seat beside him, looking excited and terrified in equal measure. Have you ever done anything like this before? David asked as the shuttle launched. Yes. 3 times in combat situations. We succeeded twice. And the third time? We lost the shuttle but saved the ship we were protecting. I ejected before impact. Thaxlor pushed the engines to maximum, racing to intercept the tumbling cargo vessel. Try not to think about it. The cargo hauler grew larger in the viewport, its slow tumble making it difficult to approach. Thaxlor matched its rotation, his hands steady on the controls, his mind calculating trajectories and timing. One chance. They would have one chance to attach the magnetic anchors and engage thrusters at exactly the right moment. Anchors ready, David reported, his voice tight with stress. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, fire. The anchors shot out, magnetic cables trailing behind them. They struck the cargo vessel's hull and locked on. The cables going taut as the shuttle's mass suddenly tried to affect the larger ship. Thaxlor felt the shuttle shudder. Felt the structural strain in every rivet and weld. The engines screamed as he pushed them past safe limits, trying to slow 2,000 tons of tumbling metal with a small shuttle's thrusters. Hull stress at 80%, David called out. Engines are overheating. We're not going to make it. Yes, we are. Thaxlor adjusted the angle of thrust, using the cargo vessel's rotation instead of fighting it. The shuttle swung in a wide arc, the cables groaning under the strain, but slowly, incrementally. The cargo vessel's trajectory began to change. 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3. Hull stress at 95%. Cables are starting to fail. 5 more seconds. The cables snapped. The shuttle spun free, tumbling through space. Alarms screamed from every system. Thaxlor fought the controls, using the maneuvering thrusters to stabilize their spin. Beside him, David was silent, his hands gripping his seat so hard his knuckles were white. Finally, the shuttle stabilized. Thaxlor checked their position, checked the cargo vessel's new trajectory, and allowed himself to breathe. We did it. The cargo vessel will miss the station by 200 meters. Close, but safe. David laughed, the sound edged with hysteria. That was the most terrifying thing I've ever experienced. And I've lived on this station during 3 major emergencies. Welcome to military operations. Every success feels like barely surviving. Thaxlor guided the shuttle back toward the station, where he could see emergency crews preparing to retrieve the now safe cargo vessel. You performed well under pressure. Your father would be proud. My father would say I'm an idiot for volunteering. But thanks. David checked the shuttle's systems. We're going to need a new shuttle. This one's toast. Small price for saving the station. When they docked, Martinez was waiting with a crowd of station personnel. As Thaxlor emerged from the shuttle, exhausted and sore from the strain of the maneuver, the chief engineer stepped forward. That was some damn fine flying, Commander. You saved a lot of lives today. Thaxlor noticed she'd used his rank. Not convict, not laborer, Commander. I did what was necessary. Anyone with the training could have done the same, but you're the one who did it. And that matters. Martinez extended her hand in the human gesture of respect. I'm recommending you for early parole review. What you did today goes above and beyond the requirements of your sentence. You deserve recognition for it. Thaxlor took her hand, feeling the strength in her grip despite her small size. Thank you, Chief. But I have more to learn here. If the review comes, I will face it. But I am not in a hurry to leave this work. Over the following months, word of the incident spread. The story changed as it traveled, becoming embellished and dramatic, but the core remained the same. A Krell convict had risked his life to save a human station. It became another piece in the complex tapestry of human-alien relations on the frontier. Thaxlor's parole review came 8 months into his sentence. He stood before a human judge via video link, answering questions about his behavior, his work, his understanding of his crimes. Chief Martinez testified on his behalf, describing his skills, his leadership during the emergency, his value to the station. The judge listened to everything, reviewed the records, and made her decision. Commander Thaxlor, Based on your exemplary behavior and your actions in defense of Frontier Station 7, I am granting your parole effective immediately. You are free to return to your people or to seek employment in Terran space. Your record will show that your sentence was completed with distinction. Free. After 8 months of labor and learning, Thaxlor was free to go. He should have felt joy or relief. Instead, he felt uncertainty. Where would he go? Back to the Krell, where his capture would be seen as shame? Or stay here, in human space, where he had found something resembling purpose again? The decision became easier when Martinez approached him after the hearing. We could use someone with your skills on a permanent basis. The pay is decent, the work is never boring, and you've already proven you can handle the challenges. Interested? Thaxlor considered the offer. Staying meant accepting that he was no longer the warrior he'd been, no longer part of the Krell military hierarchy, but it also meant continuing to work, to learn, to contribute something meaningful, and perhaps most importantly, it meant being part of something larger than himself. I accept, he said. On one condition. What's that? I want to understand more about the ghost ships, about human military doctrine and strategy, not to use against you, but to understand, to learn from the species that defeated me so completely. Martinez smiled. I think that can be arranged. There's a retired captain living on this station. Name's Morrison. Served on the Dawn's Herald for 20 years. I'm sure he'd be willing to talk to you about his experiences. Captain James Morrison. The man who had captured him, judged him, and shown him mercy. Thaxlor felt a strange sense of completion at the idea of learning directly from the human who had beaten him. I would appreciate an introduction. Over the following years, Thaxlor became a fixture of Frontier Station 7. He trained new engineers, led repair crews, and handled emergencies with the calm competence of someone who had survived worse. He met regularly with Captain Morrison, learning about human military history, discussing tactical theory, and slowly building something resembling friendship with his former captor. He also began writing. His accounts of his capture and imprisonment were published in Krell military journals, where they sparked intense debate about human capabilities and the dangers of underestimation. Some called him a traitor for praising the enemy. Others called him a realist for acknowledging the truth. But all of them read his words, and all of them thought about what he'd learned. The ghost ships continued their work, floating through the darkness, appearing helpless and vulnerable, and pirates continued to make the same mistake Thaxlor had made, seeing weakness where there was only strategy. The captures mounted. The prisoners were processed and sentenced. And slowly, word spread across the galaxy. Don't attack human ships unless you're absolutely certain they're actually helpless. 5 years after his capture, Thaxlor received a message from the Krell High Command. They wanted him to return home, to brief their strategic planning division on human tactics and capabilities. It was an acknowledgement of his expertise, a recognition that his shame had transformed into valuable knowledge. He declined. His work on the frontier was too important, too meaningful. He had found something here that he'd never had in the Krell military. The freedom to be useful without the burden of glory. The satisfaction of work done well without the need for recognition. He had mistaken the ghost ship for easy prey. That mistake had cost him his command, his freedom, and his place in Krell society. But it had also given him something unexpected. A new purpose, a new understanding, and a new respect for the species he had so dramatically underestimated. On the day that marked 6 years since his capture, Thaxlor stood at the observation window of his quarters and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Dawn's Herald was still operating, still pretending to be helpless, still teaching the galaxy's pirates the same lesson he had learned. He smiled, an expression he had learned from humans, and raised a glass of human whiskey in silent salute to the ship and crew that had changed his life. Then, he turned away from the stars and went back to work. There was always more work to do on the frontier, and Thaxlor had learned that honest work was its own kind of honor. The ghost ship had revealed a truth that morning 6 years ago. Not about human weakness, but about human strength, and Thaxlor would spend the rest of his life making sure other species learned that truth before they made the same mistake he had. In the darkness between the stars, nothing was what it seemed. And that, he had learned, was exactly how the humans liked it.